I have a confession to make. So the reason why I don't really talk about dogs that much on this channel is not because I'm hiding it as my secret deck choice for a tournament in America that I was never going to play in. It's because I'm not very good at playing it. But now that dogs is truly sitting at the top of the Winterspell metagame, I think it's finally time I put my biases aside and figure out how to play this deck. And who better to learn it from than the DLC Melbourne winner himself, Dillon Leduc. So that's what today's Improving Technical Play episode will be. It will be Dillon Leduc on dogs in his semi-finals match against Ryan McGee on Purple Steel. I picked this match because dogs is supposed to have historically a slightly difficult matchup against Purple Steel, so I would like to see whether that has changed with the addition of the Winterspell cards, and also what I can learn from Dillon by watching his play. So as to prepare for this video, I have spent quite a few hours playing dogs to learn the ins and outs at least a little bit, so I'll be able to at least give some insight or commentary as to what I think is going on, so rest assured I'm not going in completely blind. And with that, let's look at the players' deck lists. So first, let's look at Dillon Leduc, or Molestar's dogs list that he played in DLC Melbourne. As discussed in my previous video, it got many upgrades from Winterspell, namely Grandmother Willow, which supercharges out the speed of dogs draws, including Tramp 7, which is awesome, and Nani, a seemingly unassuming card that allows the deck to grind hard in games that go a bit longer. Generally, the deck aims to play 1-drops with hopefully Grandmother Willow to power out a fast Tramp 7 on turn 4 or even turn 3, and against Purple Steel, find an Emerald Chromicon to tempo your opponent's clunkier 3 and 4-drop plays, or if the board allows for it, go for a good Under the Sea that will allow you to remove your opponent's characters. Failing a Tramp 7, the deck seeks to quest where it can and grind out lore with Lady 5 and Lilo, with Gogo Tamago to snatch the last few points of lore if your opponent allows for it, and Nani also gives the deck some more grinding power. The last remaining key cards to highlight are Mowgli and Ursula, because they allow the dogs player to take the Purple Steel player's Strength of a Raging Fire, which if your opponent plays it on turn 4, singing with their 3-drop and developing a 4-drop that puts you behind on tempo, but more importantly, it also disrupts your ability to play an early Tramp 7, which could really set you very far behind. The main thing to note about how the deck plays is that it doesn't really quest every turn. The deck basically requires you to sit and wait with your early play characters because you have to be in a position to develop a Tramp 7 first of all, but also generally the deck wants to quest where the number of opposing challengers are taxed in some way, where either because you have too many characters, or because you have an Emerald Chromicon, or because your characters like Daisy Duck require 2 challengers from the opponent, or some combination of all of the above. As for Purple Steel, this is not the first time you're seeing this deck on this channel or anywhere. You know what the deck does. It's an assertive mid-range deck, it plays overstatted characters to control the board, it uses Strength of a Raging Fire to control the board, and it refills your hand with Amethyst characters like Dumbo, Genie, so forth, as well as Doc, and now Demona as well. In this matchup, Purple Steel is the control deck because your cards tend to be more expensive than dogs, you will be slower than them, so you will have to control the board because they will gain lore faster than you. What's notable about Ryan McGee's list is that he had clearly tagged for other Amethyst decks and not for dogs, because he's playing Violet Saberwing and he's most importantly not playing Angel, which would be probably the best hate card that you could play against dogs in the metagame right now. However, he does have Madam Mim Tiny Adversary that may catch a Daisy Duck out on the early turns if Dillon is not careful. And with that, let's now go to Game 1. In Game 1, Dillon Leduc is going first because he has the highest seed. His opening hand is Lady 1, Nani, Lady 5, Grandmother Willow, Lilo, Daisy Duck, and Webby. So, no Tramp 7. He opts to keep Lady 1, Willow, and Nani, throwing the remaining 4 back. It's pretty interesting that he chooses to keep Lady 1 over Daisy Duck, because Daisy Duck's able to quest for 2 earlier in the game, but this might be a matchup where he doesn't want to give his opponent cards and is unlikely to want to quest on turn 2, possibly in the face of Madam Mim Tiny Adversary, and later on in the game after you tramp, then the Lady 1 can quest for 2 anyway. So maybe that's the reason there. He's likely also keeping Nani as a safety ink, but also as a decent play on turn 3 after Grandmother Willow because he happens to find a card, and made better by Grandmother Willow because it costs 2 instead of 3. After the altar, he draws Tramp 2, Gogo Tamago, Lilo, and 1 unknown card. Not a great hand given that he hasn't found Tramp 7. As for Ryan McGee, his opener were 2 Hades, 2 Cats, 2 Dumbos, and a Palace Guard. He doesn't have a Strength of Raging Fire, he doesn't have a 2-drop, so he just ships all of them back save for the Palace Guard to find those things. Most would at least keep a Cheshire Cat, But since Purple Steel is mostly made up of 3 drops anyway, odds are you will be able to find one, so it doesn't really matter which one it is because any one of them can sing Strength of the Raging Fire, and since you don't have the strength, it's better to throw a card away to try and find it, so it looks like the correct play. I won't go into what he drew for his altar, save that he didn't draw a 2-drop, he just drew a bunch of 3 drops, Hades and Elsa, and importantly, no strength. On turn 1, Dillon Leduc inks Gogo Tamago to play the Lady, and Ryan McGee inks a Demona on his turn to play the Palace Guard. Both are inking late game cards to play their 1-drops, perfectly logical, let's move on. On Dillon's turn, he inks a Gogo Tamago again, plays the Grandmother Willow, but doesn't have the 1-drop and is forced to pass. And on Ryan McGee's turn, he inks a Giant Cobra and just passes because he doesn't have a 2-drop. So far, this game is below average draws for both players. On Dillon Leduc's turn, he plays the Nani and he sees Lady 5, Gogo Tamago and 2 Grandmother Willows. Instead of taking a Grandmother Willow which he can only play next turn, he instead decides to take the Gogo Tamago and just inks it and passes. He chooses not to quest for 1 with his Lady 1, even though it may be a safe quest only facing down a Palace Guard on the other side, but he has to play around a Manamim Challenger and he also has a Lady 5 in hand at this point, so preserving the Lady 1 is quite important. On Ryan McGee's turn, he simply inks a Giant Cobra, plays a Genie 3 and passes the turn. Back over to Dillon Leduc and we get a pretty good look at his hand. It's yet another Gogo Tamago, Lady 5, Mowgli, Lilo and Nani. He makes the only decent play of playing the Nani and sees a bunch of cards including a Tramp 7. He decides to take the Ursula instead of what looks like a Tramp 2, inks the Mowgli and plays the Ursula. And he sees Ryan McGee's hand of Sven, Elsa, Hades and the Strength of a Raging Fire which goes to the discard. He doesn't have any safe quests at this point, so he decides to pass the turn. Back over to Ryan McGee, he inks the Genie 3 that he drew for the turn, plays his Sven and just passes because there's not much he can do. Of course, he doesn't quest to the Genie 3 because he doesn't want to play into Dillon Leduc having a Tramp 2. Unfortunately, it looks like the game is not particularly going well for either player. Purple Steel doesn't have the Genie on turn 4 to put Law Pressure on, and Dox hasn't really gotten anything going besides playing a bunch of characters that can't really quest. The game is in an uneasy stalemate. On Dillon Leduc's turn, he draws a Mowgli for turn to go with the rest of his hand, which is Gogo, Lilo and Lady 5. It's not a great hand, he's not really playing for anything and he knows the opponent's 5 drops, Hades and Elsa, are going to come down next turn. The only thing for him to do would be to start questing so that Ryan McGee is forced to trade and hopefully set up a decent Lady 5 for him to grind down the board slightly so that he can start questing more freely. He starts off by playing the Mowgli and sees Elsa, Hades, confirming what he already knows. And then he quests with his 2 Nanis to at least try and get something going and make the opponent be forced to trade in. He only quests with the 2 Nanis and not with the Ursula, for example, because he doesn't want to give Ryan McGee 2 free trades into 2 of his characters. The Genie will be able to already eat one of the Nanis for free, so he doesn't want to give Sven a free ride as well, preserving the characters on his board so that he can set up a great Tramp 7 if he ever does draw into it. On Ryan McGee's turn, he takes the obvious Genie challenge into the Nani, inks a Palace Guard and plays the Hades, choosing Lilo, and of course, Dillon Leduc lets him draw 2. Why doesn't he play the Elsa there instead to trim the board down? Well, he can't stop a very cheap Tramp 7 from coming down anyway even if he plays the Elsa, so he might as well play the slower card in Hades, maybe draw a Strength so that the Sven can sing it this turn, but at least refill his hand so that he has enough resources to continue on with the game. He doesn't draw the Strength, so instead he decides to quest with his Sven instead of challenging Nani. I think it makes sense. Taking this 1-for-1 trade here is not so good given that Dillon's board is very wide, and in any event he still has the Hades and the Genie to take out the Nani the following turn should it quest again, given the law total is still slightly safe. In any event, Sven is an evasive, so it makes sense to quest here to put at least a bit of a clock on this game. He has to try and win it somehow eventually. Back over to Dillon, who leads off with a Mowgli. He sees Elsa, Hades and Olaf, so nothing too dangerous coming down. He uses his Ursula to challenge and take out what's left of the Genie 3, and then spends the remainder of his ink to shift in Lady 5, returning Ursula to his hand. At least he gets 1 card back. Then he decides to quest out with his characters, putting his law at 10 to Ryan McGee's 1. He knows he can't give Ryan McGee infinite time to deploy all of his 5 drops to build a bigger board, so he decides to put on law pressure now while the challenges that Ryan McGee can pose are still slightly limited. He is putting on a 2-turn clock after all, so looks like a good play given the circumstances of a below average draw. Back over to Ryan McGee, who draws a Giant Cobra to go with his Elsa, Hades, Olaf hand. He inks the Giant Cobra to play an Elsa and also plays the Olaf. Of course, it's time to start challenging, so he uses his Sven to take out the Lady 5, uses Elsa to take out the Lady 1. Hades takes out the Lilo, and Palace Guard pings in for 1 into the Grandmother Willow, looking to do 2 damage over 2 turns. All in all, it's a so-so spot for Ryan McGee. He now has a pretty sizable board that completely dwarfs Dillon's board, and if Dillon quests out of his characters all next turn, he only gets to 14 and he'll lose all of them. Of course, he got a bit punished by the Lady 5 shifting in, which meant that his Sven couldn't trade for value, but hey, what can you do? On Dillon's turn, he leads by returning the Lilo into play, and he plays his freshly drawn Tramp 7. He gets to keep one of the cards he draws, and he even sees Emerald Chromicon, but instead he decides to keep a Lady 5. Good choice. Chromicon can only come down next turn anyway, and he knows Elsa 5 is going to be able to come down from Ryan McGee's side, so he takes the Lady 5 so that he's able to grind out some more lore this turn and be able to quest out this turn as well, because if his small characters dies, Lady 5 can return them so he can sneak the final points of lore. Next step, what to challenge with his Nani, since he should challenge to limit the number of challenges that Ryan McGee has to make. He uses his Nani to take out the Hades instead of the Palace Guard. Since the game is likely to last 2 more turns at the minimum, probably more, the Hades challenge is logical because Hades represents 2 banishes of the smaller characters, whereas Palace Guard only represents 1. Of course, he quests out with his remaining characters, bringing his lore total to 13 to Ryan McGee's 1. On Ryan's turn, he makes the best play, which is playing the Elsa. And now we are in Challenge City. Palace Guard takes out the remainder of the Grandmother Willow, Elsa takes out the Lilo, and the other Elsa takes out the only thing left that they can take, which is a Mowgli. Olaf goes into the Mowgli as well, and then Ryan McGee makes a very interesting choice of bouncing the Elsa. And then he plays a Palace Guard and ends the turn. Bouncing the Elsa there with the Olaf seems a bit wrong to me, because 5 ink is a lot to replay given how strapped you are for ink to deal with Dillon Leduc's board every single turn, including the Lilo that's going to be coming back. Further, now he has only a 4 power on board, which is not enough to take out the Tramp 7, which means Tramp 7 is going to be able to quest 2 more times, bringing him to already 17 with Tramp 7 alone. So things look a little dicey with that bounce that Ryan McGee had made. On Dillon Leduc's turn, he skips the Lilo play because he is going to be playing Lady 5 this turn, as we had already discussed. He put himself into a position where he has to draw an Inkable to do it because the Grandmother Willow quested, but since Elsa's coming down, that's not something he could have avoided, so all good. With the Lady 5, he returns Lady 1 and Bobby Zimiruski to his hand, and of course he quests with his Tramp 7 and passes the turn. On Ryan McGee's turn, he replays the Elsa, exerts the Lady, but the exert doesn't matter because every character is jamming into Tramp 7. So see, since the Elsa exert didn't really do anything, maybe he shouldn't have bounced it the previous turn. He still has 2 more cards in his hand which he probably could have played at least one of them this turn, for example a Hades that's in his hand, and that may have given him a better chance because he would have been able to build a bigger board. On Dillon Leduc's turn, he leads by first returning a Lilo, draws a Lilo for turn, which is able to draw and discard with his Bobby Zimiruski, giving him great value. And then he plays an Ursula, sees a Violet Saberwing and a Hades, quests with his Lady up to 17 and passes. With the Lilo in play and the Lilo in discard, things are looking very good for Dillon Leduc. On Ryan's turn, he can't do any better than to play a Hades, choosing a Lilo. Of course, he's allowed to draw 2. He inks the Violet Saberwing and plays a Madam Mim Challenger. Of course, he makes a bunch of trades to trade the board down, removing all of the questers that he can, but he leaves Dillon Leduc with 2 remaining questers and 2 Lilos in the discard, so at this point it's really too little too late. Of course, Dillon returns both Lilos back into play, and he spends his remaining ink to play the Lady 1 that was in his hand from all those turns ago, returned by the Lady 5. He quests with his 2 characters, bringing his lore to 19, with 1 more character left unexerted on board, and only 3 characters on Ryan McGee's side. Yeah, this game is over. So Ryan McGee takes a bunch of game actions, but they're not going to change the outcome of the game, so I'll just recap what the game was about. I think it really showed the power of Nani to assist in this grindy game plan alongside Lady 5 and the Lilos in a situation where you don't have an explosive draw with Tramp 7. Important to note is that I think Dillon played fairly conservatively towards grinding out lore, especially in the early turns, and it paid off. Also, playing those multiple Mowglis and Ursulas every turn, even though he knew that there was likely not much to be able to take with them, gave him the near perfect information that he needed to make the best quest possible with his characters, and that alongside the fact that he drew 2 Lady 5s and 2 Lilos and was able to grind through the value with also 2 Nanis, that's what allowed him to take game 1. Hope you're enjoying the video so far, and if you've liked what you've seen and you like what we do on this channel, please be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you! Now in game 2, Ryan McGee is going first. His opener that he sees is Violet, Cheshire Cat, Madam Mim, Demona, and 2 unknown cards, but they are not a 1-drop and they are not Strength of a Raging Fire. He decides to keep only Violet, and draws into Genie 4, Palace Guard, Cheshire Cat, Giant Cobra, another Violet, and Elsa. All in all, a decent hand and a logical alter given that he didn't have a 1-drop and he didn't have strength. As for Dillon Leduc, his opener was Tramp 7, Lady 5, another Lady 5, Nani, Emerald Chromicon, Della's Moon Lullaby, and Tramp 2. After a long think, he decides to keep Tramp 7 and Emerald Chromicon. It makes sense to keep Tramp 7 and throw most of your hand trying to find 1-drops to go with Tramp 7 or find Grandmother Willow. It's interesting that he does keep the Emerald Chromicon, but since that's one of the key cards to this matchup, especially on the draw, it makes sense to hold it, especially since you play Tramp 7 to try and find the Chromicon anyway. From his altar, he draws back Grandmother Willow, Webby, Daisy Duck, Gogo Tamago, and Ursula. A very good hand. On turn 1, Ryan McGee inks the extra Violet Saberwing he has to play Palace Guard, and Dillon Leduc inks the Gogo Tamago to play Daisy Duck. On Ryan McGee's turn 2, he inks a Giant Cobra to play Violet Saberwing, quests with his Palace Guard and passes. On Dillon Leduc's turn, he decides to ink the Ursula, which is interesting because it's the card that's able to take out Strength of a Raging Fire. But if we look at the rest of his hand this turn, it makes perfect sense. From his hand, he clearly wants to play Grandmother Willow, followed by another 1-drop this turn, probably Bobby Zimmerowski, so as to preserve the ability to play Tramp 7 next turn. So those 3 cards are basically uninkable, and Emerald Chromicon and Under the Sea are actually uninkable. So that leaves him with Ursula and Webby as the 2 possible ink options this turn. If he wants to play Tramp 7 next turn, he can still play Webby first because of the Grandmother Willow, but he cannot play Ursula. If he wants to play Emerald Chromicon, he can't play Ursula anyway. In essence, he'd rather eat a Strength of a Raging Fire than jeopardize his curve by holding on to the Ursula. In any event, it might be too slow for him to play the Ursula because Ryan McGee can just play Strength of a Raging Fire this turn on his turn 3, hardcast it without singing it to take out the Grandmother Willow anyway. So all in all, makes perfect sense to ink the Ursula here. After inking the Ursula, he plays the Grandmother Willow and he plays Bobby Zimmerowski, drawing a Lilo for turn and discarding Under the Sea. He then decides to pass without questing. Makes sense. On Ryan McGee's turn 3, he inks a Captain Hook, plays a Cheshire Cat, quests with his Palace Guard and Violet, going up to 3 lore. Straightforward turn. On Dillon Leduc's turn, he draws a Lady 5 and he makes a very interesting choice. Instead of taking any lines and evolve playing Tramp 7 this turn, taking advantage of Grandmother Willow, he instead decides to play Emerald Chromicon. Why is this interesting? Well, if Ryan McGee has the Strength of a Raging Fire and he sings it onto the Grandmother Willow, then Dillon Leduc will not be able to play Tramp 7 next turn, or perhaps even for the next 2 or 3 turns. In that case, all he will be left with as far as the game plan is concerned is using Lilo and Lady 5 to grind out some lore, which may be too slow on the draw, especially if Ryan McGee also has a Genie 4 which can quest for 2 from this point of the game moving forward. I asked other Dogs players about this and their view was that the decision was close, but seeing as there's no good time to play an Emerald Chromicon, getting it down early as possible and gambling that your opponents don't have the Strength of a Raging Fire is a fine play. Keep in mind also that Ryan had only kept 1 card in his opener, which makes it less likely that he has the Strength. He also didn't play Strength last turn when he had the window to slow down Dillon massively by taking out the Grandmother Willow. All in all, bold strategy caught, and let's see if it pays off. Back to Ryan McGee, he inks another Giant Cobra, plays a Genie, draws a card, and then quests with 2 of his characters. And then he passes the turn. He does not have the Strength of a Raging Fire for the Grandmother Willow. On Dillon Leduc's turn, he draws a Daisy Duck for turn which he plays to go with his hand of Lady 5, Tramp and Lilo. And then he plays a very large Tramp 7, drawing 4 and discarding 4. Of course, he discards the Lilo along with a bunch of other stuff, and right now he's holding on to Lady 5 and another copy of Tramp 7. So he gets paid off by making the read last turn that the opponent doesn't have the Strength of the Raging Fire, because now he got Tramp 7 down, he has an extremely wide board and he's going to get to Tramp 7 again next turn. He decides not to take any quests because why do you have to? He might as well protect his almost free Tramp 7 next turn, and he just passes the turn back over to Ryan McGee. On Ryan's turn, obviously he knows he's in a horrible position, but there's not much he can do. He inks a Palace Guard, plays a Hades targeting the Tramp 7. He's allowed to draw 2, trying to find something, anything, strength. Honestly, I'm not even sure strength helps at this point given the Emerald Chromicon out. Feeling the pressure, he decides to just quest out with his characters, putting him up to 10 lore and passing the turn back over to Dillon. Dillon starts off his monster turn by returning a Lilo to play, draws a Webby, plays the Webby, and then gets to play his second Tramp 7 for free and for 7 cards. I'm going to show you what he discards just for posterity. He discards 2 Lilos, Lady 5, Grandmother Willow, come on, what's next? a Bobby Zimmerowski, a Tramp 2, and a Della's Moon Lullaby holding one card in hand. And can you guess what that one card is? Look at the opponent's board. But of course he goes for the perfect play first. He quests with the Daisy Duck to get max information revealing an Elsa. Quests with the second Daisy to see more. He sees an Olaf. And with that extra information he got, he decides, alright, it's time to show you the Under the Sea, which decimates Ryan McGee's board, leaving him only with 3 characters facing down, 19? And he quests out with the remainder that's allowed to quest and pass the turn. So with his very ambitious play by not playing around Strength of a Raging Fire, in 2 turns from that point he eliminated his opponent's Evasive Clock, he flooded the board, and furthermore with the Emerald Chromicon out, an absurdly wide board and 3 Lilos on the field and or in the discard, this game is basically over. The game goes on for another 2 or 3 turns and a lot of things happen because of the Emerald Chromicon, but it's kinda no point talking about it because Dillon really doesn't make any other new choice other than returning Lilos back into play every turn and questing out with everything, and Ryan McGee just plays cards to remove as much as he can, but it's a completely hopeless cause because all of his cards cost 3 and 4 and Dillon gets up to 3 free resources into play every single turn with the Lilos. So I'm gonna have the game now on fast forward. You can look at it and admire the destruction that is this Dogs vs Purple Steel matchup, and just kind of recap what happened in this game. It really showed what makes Dogs so terrifying. Ryan McGee basically had one window to use the Strength of a Raging Fire on his turn 4, and in that one moment that he didn't have it, the game from that point on was completely over. Credit to Dillon Leduc as well. He took the risk on that turn by playing the Emerald Chromicon instead of going for a fairly, humble Tramp 7, consigning himself to the possibility of a rough game if the opponent did have the strength, but turns out the opponent didn't, and it was lights out and smooth sailing from that point on. I think if you compare this game and the game 1, he had very different quality of draws in both games, and you could kind of detect that just from the altar itself. He actually altered quite differently in both. This one he altered more aggressively, keeping the big payoffs, and in the first matchup he altered towards having a more stable curve because he didn't have the payoffs in hand already. So I think he clearly shows good mastery of his deck in the altar and in the inking decisions that he makes as well, because he always plays towards the curve every single turn. And so that's what made him win this semi-finals match, and ultimately that's what made him the champion of DLC Melbourne. I feel a bit gross after having watched that game too. I feel like I need to take a bath. It's just a little bit too disgusting. But hey, that's what Dogs can do, right? But we have to keep in mind that in terms of the Winterspell meta game as a whole, this game is not exactly reflective of the matchup because this Purple Steel list does not play Angel, and a lot of them do moving forward. So just to get a better sense of one of the important matchups in the Winterspell meta game, Dogs vs Purple Steel with Angel, and just to watch Dogs get pummeled a little bit because I despise that deck, in the next Improving Technical Play, we are likely going to do a Dogs vs Purple Steel with Angel matchup. I have a game already picked out and I'm going to get to it, so watch out for that. In any event, grateful if you made it this far, grateful and thankful for your comments, likes and subscribes, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!